Hey everyone, let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison, and welcome to episode 198 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. You know what we say, we have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. Well, a lot has happened since the last time that I was with you, and I will get into some of it. I feel called to come to you today to say, what are we doing? Who are we called to be? Something that is so repeatedly on my mind is last year. I would say maybe even a little more than a year ago, somewhere in that time frame. My niece and I did a podcast together, and it was really focused on her and a lot of things that around trauma and just issues that so many of us walk around dealing with that nobody really sees, but yet we can all relate to it if we brought it to the surface. And in that conversation, she asked me a question about me, and she said, "Who are you?" And I think a part of that question was, underneath the layers is, what am I about? Who is Adrienne, right? And so, and I answered the question, which I think I could have answered better, but I think that that is what we are called to answer in today's times. Who are we? Who are you? Who are you? And are you walking in who you are? Not in your representative, not in who you present to the public, but are you walking in who you are? And there's so much separation today as a result of politics, I would say mainly. And there's just so much separation. And then that can cause us to put on different armor and point to each other. And my question is, are you walking in who you are? And it's something I try to do absolutely every day, walk in who I am. If you ask me that question, I will say, hell yeah. But I also understand that it's not easy. It is not easy for so many different reasons. And I fall short for so many different reasons. And I wonder if we all fall short. And there's just so much going on. Something that I often bring up on this podcast is how it's so important for us to not be passive during these times and to find our lane, find what's passionate to each of us respectively, and then we can do something to change the world. And that has been coming up so much for me in what I've been seeing over the last few weeks in my personal life, in my work life, what I might see in the media is how important it is to not be passive. And that doesn't mean that you have to go out and get on a bullhorn and, just call out something that you really object to, but you can do that through your passion. You can do that in a way that's comfortable for you. I was looking at a clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I bet I'm saying her name wrong, but I was looking at a clip of AOC on the news last week in maybe the last 6 days, within the last 6 days. And she was actually here in Atlanta, and the question was brought up to her about whether she wanted to run for president. And I don't think she ruled it out, but what stood out for me was she's out here to change the world. Like, she literally said that. She's out here to change the world. And that is what each of us is called to do, to walk in our space. And when we live authentically, we shift the world. We shift the world when we're living authentically, not when we're living through our representative who wants to be divided and uh, walk in hate and walk in separation. When we are walking in love, when we are walking in love, and even if we call out what we see in an authentic way, and it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to agree with what I believe. You don't have to believe what I believe. But we can have a meeting of the minds and grow and evolve if we're living in who we are authentically. But if you want to erase me, or if I want to erase you, I'm not living in who I am authentically if I want to do that. If I just want to erase you and take away your rights, if I want to do that, I'm not living authentically in who I am, because who each of us is a holy, loved child of God, or who you call God. Maybe you call God by a different name. I call that spiritual divine entity God. Maybe you call that presence I am. Maybe you call that presence I am. Maybe you call that presence the universe. Maybe you call that presence source. But if you are living in that authentic, pure space, and we happen to see things differently, we can come together. We can come together and come to an understanding of what our fears are, what our wants are, what our hopes are. And if you or I are buying into what we see as separation in what we receive through the media, if we buy into that separation that makes no sense at all. So many of the people that we see, they don't even have a complete thought. They just put stuff out there, throw stuff out there. It's not even a complete, comprehensive thought. It's spin. But if we can come together, and even if we disagree, if we're coming from a pure place, we can really get to the heart of things, because what we're really uncovering is our fears and our hopes and our wants, not only for ourselves, but for the people in our lives. And we really are called to speak out in ways that are comfortable for us. One of the things I want to bring up is how I was covering this story on the 50th anniversary of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And it was surprising to me and heartening to me to hear top officials calling for executives to speak out about what they see as injustice when it comes to policies that are taking place. And I guess that it touches my heart because my father was a law enforcement officer, a police officer in Buffalo, New York for almost 30 years before he passed away. And then I have law enforcement in my family. And I was at this conference just for the opening remarks when I heard the head of the organization, Renee Hall. She discussed how law enforcement practices are critical at this point in time. And she said, quote, "We are watching all of our legacy be turned backward, and we have to decide who we are going to be moving forward." And I thought for me, because as a layperson, I'm a journalist, but I'm a layperson, I thought, well, what do you mean when you say this? Is this about policies as far as how the higher ups in law enforcement are getting their fair share of promotions? Is that what it's about? Or is it about uh, the streets and how law enforcement is carried out? And I asked the president of the Georgia chapter about this. And she said that the organization was founded because Black law enforcement officers were passed over for promotions and lacked the space to discuss issues impacting Black communities. But she also said that it was to discuss crime in the Black community that was not being addressed. But my point is that when I was listening to the opening remarks from the president of Noble to the Atlanta deputy police chief, they were saying how trailblazers of this organization over the last 50 years would encourage current members to, quote, challenge the status quo and recommit to ensuring equity in leadership, training, and service, and not be afraid to take bold action. And this is a theme that has been reoccurring in my world over the last 3 weeks. I have been in different spaces where people have been resounding about how important it is that we not be passive during this time. And it doesn't matter what faith we're from, what culture we're from, what ethnicity we're from. It is important to not be passive, whether we're talking to our friends, whether we're in a workspace. It is important to not be passive, but also to go within, to first go within and really know who you are and what you believe and what you feel, not who your representative is, not who, not what feels safe. Well, it would feel safe if I aligned along the lines of separation. Not that, not what feels safe emotionally or internally, but what you really, really feel and believe. Because removing all those layers, what you really, really feel and believe is love and not fear. Love and not fear. I was really taken aback today when I was writing a story about Rashaad Muhammad, who was an inmate in the Fulton County Jail. And that's a place that has had many, many issues, and there's many media outlets who have reported about this in depth. I have reported about this at a surface level and at a general level. And today I wrote a story as many news media have in the Atlanta area about Rashaad Muhammad and how this young man in his 30s, was arrested last year in August. And when he was being taken into custody, he told the officer that he needed to get his medication that was in his car. And that was not retrieved. And that medication was essential because he had an infection, I believe, in his gallbladder, and he needed it. He needed the antibiotics so he wouldn't become septic. So he was incarcerated and from August to February. But the first 11 days that he was incarcerated, he was on a medical floor. I guess he was in the general population area. He was in a medical floor. He kept trying and trying to get the medication for his condition, and he didn't get it. And so you know what happened? His fingers and his legs were amputated. And it is just incredible, incredible that this can happen. There's been a lot of deaths in the Fulton County Jail. At this particular location on Rice Street, there's been a lot of deaths. It's been reported on. The place is supposed to be renovated. But to hear about the circumstances of this young man against the backdrop of so many who have died there is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And what I'm trying to get to is, who are we? Who are we as a people? And when I say as a people, I mean as humans. Who are we and as individuals that we just don't care? That we don't care. Who are we that we have gotten to a place that we just don't care? Because that's not how we're born. We are not born that way. And, I accept that maybe that conditioning of not caring through abuse and environment may start for some people as adolescents, but I don't think that's by and large. Definitely to become hardened to someone who is in need happens, or at least witnessing it and not acting happens from some kind of experience we had, I guess. I mean, who are we? That is not who we are as humans. I don't care what color we are. I don't care what color we are. That is not who we are. And this whole thing that I'm sharing is just me trying to get to the understanding that, I mentioned humans. Well, yeah, we're human second, second. But who we are first are spiritual beings. That's who we are first. And, we can ha at that and, all of that. But after that dissipates, we understand that there's something greater than us. We understand what we experience through our own being and connecting with energy and connecting with somebody else and connecting with love that we have for our children, for our parents, for our siblings, for our friends, for our grandparents. We understand that that is a love and an energy that is something that is beyond physical. So, how do we get to a place where somebody in need is asking for our help and we let the circumstance unfold to the point where they lose their limbs? How do we get to a point of cruelty? And honestly, that has to do with ourselves and the love that we have for ourselves, that we allow for ourselves, and the forgiveness that we allow for ourselves. There's so much going on, whether it's with ICE, whether it's with what I just shared, where it's, what is this? What is this? I saw a post on social media about gerrymandering and how important it was to get out to vote, to continue the unfolding of voter rights, and to continue the gerrymandering against voter rights. What the hell? What is that? What is that? What is that? Why do we not even have, for the sake of argument, a popular vote that decides in fairness? What is it that we individually really want? To feel safe, to have wealth, to be able to get yours? What is it that you really want that prevents the fairness of all? And sometimes I think about how, history just shows us that was never a thing. The fairness of all was never a thing. Never a thing. Let me know. Share with me how I'm wrong. Share with me how I'm wrong. When I say never a thing, I mean that there was always something against the fairness of all. Through wars, through slavery, through the Holocaust, through so much. There was always something against the fairness of all. And what is that? What is that? And just because that's the way it has always been, it doesn't mean that's the way that it will always be. That does not have to be the case. I was watching a podcast episode that I highly recommend, which was Lewis Howes, his conversation with Anita Moorjani. And if you, by chance, had been a fan of Wayne Dyer, then you would know that she is someone that he had talked about often and would bring her on his different events. And she had, I guess you could say, a near-death experience, or she will tell you that she actually died and she experienced cancer. And this was about 20 years ago. And I'm not going to tell you all the details because she really goes into her story on Lewis Howes, and perhaps you have heard her story before, but she definitely goes through all the details on this podcast episode. But she had cancer, and she talks about how it was for her fear that she believes caused this cancer to arise in her body. And it was a fear of people pleasing in her case. And she goes through a whole experience. She went into a coma, and how she was able to um, see and hear what was going on around her during this coma, and basically how she was not honoring herself was how she got into the situation that she was in. And I mean, I'm doing her story no justice. I really, really hope that you go and watch it. And uh and then Lewis Howes talked about, so her whole thing was, as I said, about fear, that it wasn't really cancer that was her problem. It was fear, fear in her life, the way she moved through the world. That was her issue. And then as a result for her, that was how how the cancer came about. And cancer is such um, a big thing, that I don't want anyone to misunderstand me, and that's why I'm saying it was for her that this came about. And then he talked about very, very briefly, he just mentioned about how, as a result of him not living authentically, how he started having a rash for many, many years. And when he made a shift, this rash went away. And everything they talked about, I really related to, especially the little bit that he shared, because I have that. I have that issue, where I have different things come about in my body that will appear as allergies. But I understand that it's really about how I'm living, how I am internalizing things, how I'm trying to please others and do what I think I should do, even though I know that the real answer is to live authentically through my lens. So, all of this to me relates. All of this to me relates. How we are so connected. And that's something that she brought up, how we are really all connected to each other. He asked her about 3 lessons that she would leave the world. If nobody knew anything about her, what would her 3 lessons be? And again, I related to this because um, the way I feel, and similar to what she said, is how, well, what I feel is the first thing that we're called to do is to accept the love of God, accept the love of that divine source, who you might call source, who you might call your higher power, who you might call universe, who you might call nature, who I call God. Accept that love. Accept that love, that we are wholly loved children of that divine source. And then accepting and embracing that love, I believe, then we understand that we are here to love ourselves and to love and serve each other. That's why we're here, to love ourselves and serve each other. If we can love ourselves, then we can love our fellow man. If we can forgive ourselves, then we can forgive our fellow man. So I really, really hope that you watch that episode. And I will place a link in the show notes. And lastly, what I want to share is Let's Start Healing was a 2026 finalist for the Atlanta Press Club Awards. And I want to share why this was such a big deal for me. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. But I want to share why this was a big deal for me. Uh, Let's Start Healing was one of 3 finalists. Matthew Terrell, who has a podcast, and I'm sorry that I cannot remember the uh, name of the podcast, but he is a professor at Kennesaw State University. He was a finalist, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was a finalist for their Politically Georgia podcast, and Let's Start Healing was a finalist, or I was a finalist for Let's Start Healing. So Let's Start Healing did not win. Matthew Terrell won in a separate category. And Politically Georgia, the AJC, they won a few awards. The night of the Press Club Awards, it was the Atlanta Press Club Awards of Excellence. They won a few awards that night. And they won for their episode of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I believe when she resigned from Congress. And my episode of Let's Start Healing was my conversation with Marianne Williamson, which meant a lot to me. And I thought it was a really great conversation. So this is why it was so important. And it's so important to stand in who we are. And this is the message that I'm trying to bring. Like, we have to know who we are, and we can't always succeed every day in walking in our truth and walking in our authenticity. I mean, I have a ton of insecurities, not a ton, but the ones that I have feel big. So, we don't always, rise to the challenge of this world every day, but to keep moving forward. That's the thing. That's the thing. So I'm bringing this up because I was on staff at the AJC. The second time I was on staff was from 2020 to 2024. And I was on staff from 2004 to, I want to say, 2009. And that was my first real entry into media, 2004. I wrote a book on relationships, and you can see it actually behind me, Colliding on the Road to Happiness. I wrote a book, and I felt like I interviewed like 50 men and women about relationships between Black men and women. And I felt like that book, in interviewing people, helped me to get in the door at the AJC. And I came in the AJC as an assistant and in the editorial um, newsroom. And I learned a lot. I moved up to a reporter position, and it was great. And I took a buyout in 2009. I went on to work elsewhere. I worked with AOL Patch, but then I came back to the AJC in 2015 as a freelancer, a freelance magazine editor. And that was great. The magazine made money, but they shut it down in 2018. So 2015 to 2018. And there were some other magazines that the newspaper had, and they shut the magazines down, although they were making money. And it was really a great experience. And so then I'm freelancing, and I'm like kind of floundering, like, oh my God, how am I going to, earn money? And I did that for about a year or so. And then right before the pandemic. I mean, literally a month before the pandemic, I was hired back at the AJC on staff as a local reporter. Now, in 2018, that was 2020. In 2018, I started Let's Start Healing. And I'm doing Let's Start Healing and I'm publishing every week. And I've got great momentum going on and everything. And then I get hired, a month before I got hired in February 2020. Everything shut down in March. And it was while everybody went home, so did the AJC, but we worked remotely. And it was just everything was on hustle mode for the pandemic. And then comes June, George Floyd is killed, and it's just hustle, hustle, hustle mode. And it was really when I felt in the thick of things as far as the pandemic or as far as the protests of George Floyd, and I felt like I'm really doing something. I felt like, yeah, I'm vibing, I'm in the momentum of this, right? And in fact, a friend who was worked with, forgive me for not knowing the name of the company, not knowing, but not being able to think of the name of the company that owns the Miami Herald. A friend said, "Hey, are you interested in a position at the Miami Herald?" And I had a preliminary interview. This is like mm, late 2020. I mean, because George Floyd happened in June. So this was like a few months after that. And I do a preliminary interview, which goes well, but I'm feeling like, you know, there's a lot of Black editors here at the AJC, the Atlanta Journal Constitution, and there's so much going on. And why would I want to leave? So I literally said, no, after that great interview, preliminary interview, I literally withdrew myself and said, no, I want to stay here. And then people started leaving the AJC, such as Monica Richardson, who eventually went to the Miami Herald, and now she's at USA Today, if you know Monica Richardson's name, who is a former boss of mine from way back in the day. It feels like, I would say, like 2007, 8, 2007. So anyway, I digress. Um, so during those days, in those years, I stopped being able, I guess I was able, but I stopped doing publishing episodes of Let's Start Healing weekly because I was so absorbed or stressed with the work. Because eventually it became really difficult. The work experience became really difficult, but then it got better. But still, I'm absorbed in the work and trying to, uh, just do my job. And Let's Start Healing would publish every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, once a month, something like that. So, cut to, I guess, 2023. And I am trying to do the podcast more regularly. And the AJC is the AJC's publisher is retiring, Kevin Riley. He's retiring. And during this meeting, like a town hall meeting, there's a conversation with Kevin Riley, who's leaving, and the new editor in chief about the direction of the newspaper. And, it sounds very promising, but I remember so much in that town hall, they were talking about skewing younger. And I'm thinking, Well, I feel I have so much to offer. Where do I fit in? Okay. Where do I fit in? And so I didn't see where I fit in. And then eventually, I remember that so well because I felt it wasn't a good feeling because I'm a person of a certain age. And I'm older now than I was then. And that was 2023. And I'm thinking, where do I fit in? And I wasn't the only one of a certain age in the room. So then, cut to a little while later, they announced, I think it was a little while later. I don't think it was during that event, but regardless, Andrew Morse is named as the publisher. And so there we have Andrew Morse, this guy who worked at CNN. He did this and that and the other at CNN. I believe he did this and that and the other at ABC News. And so then um, he is going to have regular town halls and be very transparent with the staff. Okay. And so at this point, now I'm not working, I'm not in the office. Everything is remote for a lot of us. Some people like being in the office. I don't like being in the office, but everything is remote. And so, unless, they're having a town hall and then you go in. And so, Andrew Morse says that what he would like to do is meet with every staff person, especially in the newsroom. He wants to have a one-on-one meeting. So I'm taking this literally, and I schedule a visit with him. And he seems like a regular down to earth guy. And I schedule a visit, and when I go into, first of all, you ever have one of those days where you just, you know, first, I'm not a morning person, although it wasn't that early. It was like 10:30, 11 o'clock, this meeting. But you ever have one of those days where you just don't feel like, great, in your skin? And I go into the office. There's one or two people in the office that are sitting close to where his office is, and it's mostly vacant because most people are working remotely. So I go, I meet him in his office, and prior to this, he's sounding enthusiastic, in the email. Yay! Looking forward to meeting you in person, yada yada. Like he doesn't know who I am. I'm not really anybody, at the newspaper necessarily. Okay. And so I go in, I try to share, who I am, what I want. I have this podcast, and, I'd love to bring it to the newspaper. And he asked me, like, how many followers subscribers do I have? Or what did he ask me? He asked me um, downloads, basically, how many downloads I have. He was like, "You ever talk to somebody and they're talking to you and they're like, you're talking to them and they're mostly like, you know, like they're really not caring about you?" And that's kind of what it was. That's very much what it was. And, I didn't go in there and say, I have 100,000 subscribers, and this is the podcast, and this is what uh I would love to bring to the AJC. I wanted to produce a podcast for them on any level. I had One of my former editors there has suggested that I pitch a podcast on, I forgot what this section was called. I can't believe I can't remember what this section was called, but it was basically special lifestyle events or special people that were doing special things in Atlanta. I hate that I can't remember the name of the section. And so I thought, hey, I had written stories for this section. So I thought, hey, I could present podcast episode for, this section. That was shot down. That was before he got there. That was shot down by somebody before he got there. Then I wanted to produce podcasts for unapologetically ATL, which is before it became UATL, right? That didn't go anywhere. Then I pitched Let's Start Healing and, trying to bring this under their umbrella. Nope. So when, and, the point I'm making is I'm putting my work before my work of the podcast. Whereas before I came on staff, I'm publishing every week. But now I'm publishing if I can every week, if I can every 2 weeks, once a month. It's what I can do, right? So anyway, that was shot down. Then I'm in a batch of people. I'm in the first batch of people who get laid off. There were in 2024. There was 2 rounds, I would say, in 2024, and then there was another round, I think the beginning of this year, the end of last year, but there's been at least 3 rounds of layoffs. So I was in the first round. So last year, I'm now with another publication as a contractor. And I must say, I contract with different organizations and it's much more fulfilling. And I can go into more about that, at another time. But I was able to write a story on Marianne Williamson in our conversation and include our podcast conversation and submit the podcast episode. And it was nominated for a regularly released podcast series. Wow. I mean, when I say nominated, I nominated Let's Start Healing as a regularly released podcast series. And it was one of 3 finalists against, one of which was going up against the AJC. And one of my friends said, you might win. You might win because the AJC always wins. You might win. And so I clung to that, although I thought it was timely. They might take it into account about, the Marjorie Taylor Greene episode and her being news at the time of that episode. And that was the reason for the episode. But I still clung to it. And it is a really, really big accomplishment for this podcast because what this podcast is about is humanity. It is about humanity. It's about spirituality. It's about connecting to what is real. And if you've ever lost anybody in your life who you love so much, whether it's a parent, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, if you've a friend, if you've ever lost anyone in your life, then you know what's real. Maybe you've gotten away from that realness because time has passed, but in that moment of loss, you know what's real. You know what's real. And that's what I'm just trying to bring home. What is real? We are at a time in this world where we have to walk in truth and not in who we present ourselves as. Who we present ourselves as because, we want to make sure we're okay. I tell myself a story that please tell me that I'm wrong because I am so willing to be wrong. and want to be wrong. But I tell myself a story that some people who support what is going on in this world right now, that supports divisiveness, that supports breaking up families, that supports instilling fear, that some people who support the practices around that, the weakening of voting rights, I tell myself that people who support that do that because when the world falls apart, they believe they'll be safe. That's what I tell myself. And I'm saying that from a sincere place. And I want to be wrong about that. I want to be enlightened around that. But I'm just sharing that that's what I tell myself. And if that's true, that's not safety. That's not safety. I mean, that might represent a little bit of physical safety, but that's not real safety. Real safety comes from what's inside. Real safety comes from what's inside. And what's inside, every one of us, even the people that we don't like, the people that we have extreme dislike for, what's deep inside under all those layers is something divine. Is something divine. But some of us choose to walk away from or live in a place far away from that divinity. But what's really important is that authentic place that's inside of us. Well, I have I have some really, really great episodes coming in this next chapter of Let's Start Healing. Great conversations with great guests. And I thank you for joining me for this conversation. Please subscribe if you haven't already and share Let's Start Healing with at least one person that you know. And until next time, let's start healing.